Tuesday, July 22nd. It is around 6:15. I am exhausted, and we just wrapped up day one of ACC Kickoff in Charlotte at the Hilton. I believe it's at the Hilton. But just wanted to jump on here every single time we conclude. We have 3 days of ACC Media Day. We will jump on here and just recap some of the biggest takeaways from each day. Quick PSA on the tweets that come out from ACC Media Day from me, because it is me that's doing the tweeting. Not going to be exact quotes, usually paraphrasing, which is why I don't use these. I'm doing air quotes for you listening on podcast. Just want to give the gist of what's being said, the takeaways of what's being said. So did want to just be honest and come clean on that. We're going to be a little all over the place here, but going to share all of my thoughts on the teams that were spoken to, the commissioner, and then some other observations from, I know Big 10 Media Days got started. There's been some other headlines in college football that have gone on, and we're just going to touch on everything. First and foremost, the SEC has made this something that appears to be pretty regular now. At least we've adopted it here in the ACC. For those of you listening, it is a brag rag that was on every table for every media member to look at. And they have some stats on here. They have some information on here. It's basically all of the ACC accomplished greatness, greatest hits that we have. I thought it was a nice touch. The SEC went viral. I can't remember. I think it was in the spring. They handed out a binder of every reason why the SEC is God's favorite conference and why they are better at everything. So the ACC said, hold my beer. We're going to do the same thing. I'm going to read a couple that I have highlighted here that jumped out to me that I thought were interesting. The ACC, I feel like we do this every year and it gets us in a little bit of trouble. I feel like we say this every once in a while, and some years it works out, some it didn't. Last year it did not. The ACC, top left quarter. This is the conference of quarterbacks. The statistic that they provided that popped out for me, 5 quarterbacks ranked in ESPN's top 15 quarterbacks. No other conference has more. That is interesting. Last year, the Heisman odds, basically if you were a starter in the SEC, it seemed like you were in the Heisman odds, or at least near the top of it. So I find that interesting. They also mentioned strongest non-conference schedule of any league. Jim Phillips talked a lot about that today, and it's listed here. The one that I highlighted is 26 games against peer P4 opponents, including Notre Dame, is the most of any conference by at least 8 games. This has been the Big 10 and SEC's biggest talking point, it seems, over the last couple of months. The Big 10 complaining that the SEC does not play that extra conference game. The SEC basically rationalizing it by saying the SEC is harder than everything else, so our schedule, while less games, is more difficult than everybody else's. Who knows who's right? But the ACC seems to be making the case that they have the strongest non-conference schedule of any league. It also goes on to say 14 games against teams ranked in the final 2024 college football playoff rankings, most of any conference. And then also 16 games against teams in ESPN's 2025 way too early top 25, which is the most of any conference. Okay. The middle section, little tough. We're talking about 6 national titles. It's front and center. It's right in the middle. Right when you pick it up. If this is the Waffle House menu, this is where the All-Star is. It's tough that I know that. It says 6 national titles. These national titles are in women's rowing, women's lacrosse, men's tennis, fencing, women's swim and dive, women's soccer. We love winning national championships. Don't know if that needed to be in the middle for ACC Kickoff. Just my opinion. People may disagree with that. Here are the 2 that I found really interesting. These are on the right-hand side. ACC Football Fridays. ACC football is set to dominate Fridays this fall with a league record 12 games scheduled, most of any conference. So I don't personally have a problem with playing on Fridays. I am upset that Virginia Tech doesn't play on Thursday. That's odd. Virginia Tech plays on Friday against Cal. So we are one of those games that are scheduled to play on a Friday. I did notice a couple of media members today were chatting a little bit, saying it wasn't something to brag about because Friday is for high school football. I thought that was pretty funny. But I'm torn. I mean, look, the MAC, and I hate to compare us to the MAC, but MACtion has been something that has really bolstered the MAC and gotten more eyeballs on them. So on one hand, I like that we're providing more opportunities for more people to watch the ACC. Nonetheless, it is something that is listed on this page. And we saved the best for last because I touched on this. I can't remember if it was the last podcast or a couple of podcasts ago. The point is, ACC continues to own week one. It says the ACC is the only league to compete across 5 days, Thursday through Monday, during week one of the college football season. Now, here's the most important part. Week one includes 7 games against P4 opponents. No other conference has more. This weekend should be, I mean, you can view it as an opportunity for the ACC, but to me, it is a horrifying weekend for the ACC because there are some tough matchups on here, and you are either going to separate yourself and get people to say, wow, okay, ACC really showed up, they can make some noise, or you are going to basically completely eliminate your ability to be a multi-bid league because it will create such a hole to crawl out of. We saw this happen with men's basketball in the SEC ACC Challenge this past year. I believe the ACC won 2 out of the, I think, 18 or 16 games that we played in the SEC ACC Challenge. I have them in my notes later. But here are those 7 games that we're going to be playing on week one. Virginia Tech versus South Carolina, neutral site. Florida State, Alabama, Clemson, LSU. 3 tough games. 3 really tough games. 2 of those games, the ACC will be underdogs. Miami versus Notre Dame, Georgia Tech versus Colorado, Syracuse versus Tennessee. I would say Syracuse versus Tennessee is probably the most unwinnable game on this list for the ACC. And then you have North Carolina taking on TCU. So, you know, you go 500. I think that's a win for the ACC. You cannot drop the ball here. You cannot be looking at a red wedding type situation for the ACC because you might put yourself in a hole that you're not going to be able to crawl out of. But in all, I thought this was pretty cool. They left this on every table. Again, on the front, you have a brag rag, and on the back, you have the schedule for every single team. So thought that was a nice touch. Today, we heard from the commissioner. We heard from Miami, SMU, Stanford, Cal, and UVA. My high-level observations from being at, I did not attend ACC Kickoff last year. I was there 2 years ago. It was a smaller crowd than it was in 2023. I don't know if that will change later on as you get Bill Belichick coming in. I'm assuming that the room is going to be packed when Bill Belichick is there, or when Norvell is there, or Dabo, or some of the other schools. This was obviously, you know, from a national standpoint, SMU, somewhat interesting. Miami, interesting for everybody. And then you have Stanford, Cal, and UVA. All respect to those 3 other schools, not moving the needle in the national conversation space. Food was great. Food was fantastic. Had tacos, salad, sweet tea was really good. Coffee, had 3 cups, gave me a little bit of the jitters. But anyway, Jim Phillips, he spoke for 60 minutes. He had a 23-minute opening statement, and he had 33 minutes of Q&A. Here were the 2 biggest things that Jim Phillips said today. Number 1, he said that ACC schools will be subject to fines for court or field stormings, it will be $50,000 for the first offense, $100,000 for the second offense, and $200,000 for the third offense. Like it, don't like it. I think you can kind of understand it. I always mix it up. I can't remember if it was Cooper Flagg, but I think it was Kyle Filipowski at Duke who was he wasn't injured, but he was put in a position where he could have been injured. You also think back to Caitlin Clark. You also think back to the ACC actually hasn't had a ton of ugly situations, but it definitely does provide the opportunity for ugly situations. The SEC fines their schools $500,000 per incident for comparison with those types of situations. So it's going to be interesting to see how this is handled. I will say, as it goes, I was having this conversation with David Cunningham. As it goes with basketball, Virginia Tech actually does a really good job avoiding getting into trouble here with basketball. I think one of the reasons that we have avoided getting into trouble is because students have to drop 12 or 15 feet to get onto the court after a big win. And shout out to the Rhino guys. The Rhino guys kind of form that V or that half circle, allowing the visiting team to get out of the field. But nonetheless, this is something that the ACC will be doing this year. The second thing that the ACC will be, air quote, doing, and I say that because the ACC is not currently having a fine attached to this, but Jim Phillips announced that men's and women's basketball, baseball, and football will be instituting player availability reports. So football will be issued 2 days before kickoff with an update the day before, and then 2 hours before kickoff on game day. A lot of people were, I don't want to say a lot. I saw a couple of people that were zagging this and acting like this is a bad thing. I think this is far overdue. I think it's silly that we are in a situation where on game day, when I or any one of my buddies pull up to a bar for the Syracuse game last year, you find out when you get your second drink and your wings that, oh, our starting running back is not playing. Oh, our starting quarterback is not playing. I have already placed my bets. So I personally think this is something that we should have had worked out for a long, long time. Now, Jim Phillips also touched on gamesmanship being a huge part of what we see in the sport. He also touched on saying that, again, there's not going to be a fine associated with this. He hopes it doesn't get to that, but he hopes that people will just do what they're asked to do. I don't know how many times in the history of humanity that has worked. He said that when he was on the Zoom call with the coaches, nobody said anything. So he said he didn't know what that meant. I think what that meant is that nobody is going to change what they're doing, and you're going to get a whole lot of probables and probables. But who knows how that works out. Thinking of just Virginia Tech moments that this changes. Liz Kitley. Coach Brooks and Virginia Tech did not need to show their hand the entire ACC tournament when Liz Kitley, I don't know when exactly Virginia Tech knew, but they didn't share that Liz Kitley was going to be done for the season. And teams may have had to prepare for Liz Kitley. I think back to Justin Fuente's entire tenure where we never spoke about injuries. You never had any idea who was available. And that was just kind of the situation. Last year, we saw it a lot with Coach Pry, not knowing who was available, not knowing who was playing or not playing, who's wearing pads, and you're like refreshing Andy Bitter's Twitter timeline to see who's dressed and who's participating in warmups. So if we could do away with that nonsense, that would be great, especially in the era of sports gambling and, people probably texting kids or equipment managers or, people on the dance team to figure out, hey, is so-and-so playing? Is so-and-so not playing? We need to get away from that. So I hope we fix it. I do not think it will be fixed, that there is no fine or punishment associated with it. A couple of other things that were touched on, and here's some questions or topics that were brought up and just kind of how he handled it. He was asked about the ACC being seen as a second-rate conference, gave a very honest answer. We can't go 2-11 in postseason bowl games. We have to do our part. 100%. Completely agree. I do think the bowl game situation is obviously much different today than it was in 2000 and even 2018, 2016. I was talking about this with Will Trent when Virginia Tech beat Arkansas in the Belk Bowl of 2016. That was universally accepted, if you were looking at that game specifically, as a big deal. If 2 9-win teams play in a bowl game today, I would say the chances of that game and the results of that game being taken seriously are probably at or less than 50%. You look at the Miami Pop-Tart Bowl. This is a good comparison. Look at the Belk Bowl from 2016 or the Belk Bowl from 2019 when we played Kentucky, right? And how people reacted to that, who played in the game, who didn't opt in, who did opt in, whatever. Compare that to the Pop-Tart Bowl between Miami and I believe Iowa State this year, right? Quarterback's not playing, coming out in the game. It's kind of just nobody's going to think about that game 3 years from now. On the flip side, you have the South Carolina-Illinois game. A little bit of an outlier. It's not a playoff game, but a lot of people care about it. So bowl games are a little tough, and I think that the issue with the bowl games kind of reinforces what I'm saying on how important week 1 is for the ACC and every conference that chooses to schedule difficult out-of-conference games. So there you go. He also talked a little bit about men's basketball. He agreed our league is not good enough right now. They obviously went to 18 games instead of 20, which allowed the league to play 2 more competitive out-of-conference games per team. He believes this will help with winning percentage and some other metrics that were important for seeding. Obviously, an awful, awful year for the ACC when it comes to men's basketball. Super down year, bad out-of-conference situation. Every team kind of beat up on one another. And the ACC ends up with not a ton of teams playing in March. So this is a way that they're looking to mitigate that. I know I'm a little all over the place here. I did just want to touch on this. With the question being that the ACC is viewed as a second-rate conference, I do just want to add that the ACC is continuously treated like the redheaded stepchild, and the ACC has lost 0 teams to realignment. Meanwhile, the Pac-12 is actually dead. The Big 12 has lost multiple teams. So I don't really understand why the ACC ends up as the butt of the joke with everybody that isn't the Big 10 and the SEC, but that is the reality of the situation that we're in right now. One more thing that Jim Phillips said, and I'm paraphrasing here again. 2 things. He said that Clemson and Florida State have shared with me and all of the league schools that they want to be in the ACC. Okay. He said, I have a responsibility to ensure our schools want to be in this league and not that they have to. Okay. What I liked is regarding the new revenue sharing model where basically you will get more dollars if you get more eyeballs. He said, if you want to make more TV money, invest. Go fight for those dollars from a viewership standpoint. I am pretty surprised that other conferences have not adopted this yet. He said, if you want to make more money, compete at a high level. Schedule difficult opponents, excel in multiple sports. I am 100% for that. I don't understand if you are Alabama, Texas, why you're okay with Vanderbilt and Mississippi State taking the same money from the conference that you do. I don't understand why if you are Ohio State and Michigan, you are okay with Rutgers and Maryland taking the same amount of money from a conference that you do. I also hate that I just mentioned 3 teams that Virginia Tech has lost to in the last 4 years in Maryland, Vanderbilt, and who is the other one? Maryland, Vanderbilt, and Rutgers. So that's a bummer. That is a bummer, man. Look, here are my thoughts on everything Jim Phillips said today. Number 1, everybody's going to be pissed at Jim Phillips. Every fan that sees a quote from him is going to find some way to be pissed at Jim Phillips. Totally understand. The ACC is in a bad spot. Do I think that it's Jim Phillips' fault? No. Do I think it's mostly Jim Phillips' fault? No. But it's the reality of the situation. If I were to say anything about Jim Phillips, he has a limited amount of progress or changes he's able to make that make the situation better. You can point to he, for however he got it done, was able to navigate or prevent the dumpster fire of headlines or somehow Clemson and Florida State exiting the league and then making us insolvent, because that's exactly what would have happened if those two schools left. My only gripe that I have is if you look at Tony Petitti and you look at Brett Yormark and you look at Greg Sankey, and I don't even know if this is a complaint because it's really not. It's just more of an observation. Jim Phillips is not the kind of guy that's going to be boisterous, going to be loud, going to voice his upsetliness or air his grievances. He didn't have Festivus today, for all of you Seinfeld people out there. Now, for better or for worse, Greg Sankey, he's a bulldog. When he gets up there, you're going to know how he feels. You're going to know that he thinks the SEC is the best conference in the world, and you're going to know what he wants to get out of the college football playoff expansion, realignment, everything. Brett Yormark, you are going to leave feeling super impressed about how he's thinking about things. You are going to know he's different. And you also have the benefit of a bunch of really loud coaches in the Big 12. Deion Sanders, you look across the board, there are a bunch of coaches who are pretty loud. It's almost like the Big 12 is kind of rock and roll in the early days, where they're a little different, a little crazy. That might be a wild and just ridiculous out of the box comparison, but that's kind of how I feel about it. Is the Big 12 is so unorthodox and throwing all these weird pitches, and if you're fighting them, they got this weird stance and stuff that you're almost like, I don't know what to think about them. Jim Phillips is kind of boring. Jim Phillips is kind of bland. Jim Phillips doesn't really capture headlines. And he was asked about this. I think Andre Adelson asked, why have you not been more vocal with your stance on the college football playoff or your feeling on the direction of college sports? And he said, look, I don't think that it's really a need or important for me to be public with how I feel. It's important that we do what's best for the sport. And it's important that I do what's best for this conference, but bringing it public really doesn't do anything. And I agree with him in large regard. I agree. There are a lot of times where, people will be overly critical on if a coach is good behind a microphone. And I promise I'm not talking about just one coach or one school. How good is this guy behind the microphone? How good is this team on social media? How good is this coach when he's interviewed in the summer? None of that really matters. What really matters is how many games he wins in the fall or on the basketball court or on the diamond. That's what's important. And ultimately, Jim Phillips' legacy will be remembered as how he navigates the next however many years this conference still exists, or what exactly comes about of this entire situation. So ultimately, that's what matters, and that's what he'll be judged on. Moving on to some of the schools that spoke today. Again, this is just a little bit of word vomit on each one, but I do have some thoughts. They started with Mario Cristobal from Miami. He had a 2-minute open, and I got to tell you, my title for Miami was just, hey, there's Carson Beck, and also it's kind of made some excuses here. Kind of a little weird. Started off nice. I kind of liked it. At first, Mario took some ownership from last year. He said last year we had a chance to win every single game, but we didn't. The bottom line is we didn't get it done. That is a fact. That is what you want to hear, right? He took ownership in poor ball security and not finishing football games. So towards the end of the year, we did not finish ball games, and we also had poor ball security. It was interesting. Didn't talk a lot about the defense. Defense is pretty bad last year. I would argue that's one of the reasons why you didn't finish the way that you wanted to, but I digress. He made 2 remarks regarding coffee, which I enjoyed. Obviously, he is a huge coffee guy. Said he's really struggling in Charlotte to find some good coffee. And he also spoke a little Spanish, which was nice. A little change. Bilingual. Now, this is what I hated. He started talking about, I forget the exact word that was used by somebody in the crowd. They said something along the lines of like, can't get it done-itis. I think that's exactly what it was can't get it done-itis. And he disagreed, but then he started saying some really weird stuff about Miami's past. He said verbatim, year one, our roster was not really built to take on Power 4 football, which on its face is an absolutely preposterous statement to make. Year one, Miami had a 55% blue chip ratio, which was 14th best in the country. Sure, this year it is 61%, which is 12th in the country. So it's better than it was his first year. I'm not trying to say he hasn't done a good job turning over the talent in Miami, because he certainly has. To say that you were not built to take on Power 4 football is an insane statement. It is a crazy statement. If you are going to just place that on the shoulders of the roster, I think that's crazy. For those of you that don't know, the blue chip ratio is 4 and 5 stars on the roster. To say that you didn't have the roster to compete at Power 4 football is crazy. It's also even crazier when you point out that he had that blue chip ratio and lost to the Middle Tennessee State Fighting Jalen Lanes. Wild. Just wild. One truth that he did tell here was he told a story that he was on the tarmac for a recruiting visit as the NFL draft was going on in 2022, and the Canes were in danger of not having a player drafted for the first time this century. That is true. Jonathan Ford was the only Cane drafted in 2022. He was the 13th pick in the 7th round. So that's a little bit of a fun fact. Some Miami people did see these comments from Mario Cristobal, and they were not thrilled. The one other comment that he made that made me scratch my head a little bit, I don't even want to call it coach speak. I would call this like crazy speak. He said that you couldn't find a more professionally run organization outside of their collective. I don't know a lot about the Cane Connect. I think it's called Cane's Connection, Cane Connect. But I'm sure you could find some organization that is more professionally run than the NIL collective at Miami. Maybe he was being a little hyperbolic. Wisconsin Badgers would probably say something a little bit different. If you don't know about that, look up Wisconsin, Miami, NIL. Check that out. Moving on, SMU, Rhett Lashley. Award for SMU and Rhett Lashley. The I Chose Violence Award. That is sitting square on SMU and Rhett Lashley's desk. 7-minute open out of our boy Rhett, and he took shots at absolutely everybody. He actually, if Jim Phillips put on his Rhett Lashley cape today, Jim Phillips would have been like everybody's hero. But it was Rhett Lashley who posted a hilarious selfie this morning in Charlotte. Must have been out on a run or something. But he was getting ready to take on ACC Kickoff. So here are the shots that he took. Speaking on the ACC, he said, in the last 15 years, we're tied for the second most championships with 3, along with the Big 10. I don't know why that's not talked about more. I don't know either, Rhett. Good question. He said about the SEC, the same 6 schools have won the SEC since 1964. Not a single one is different from 1964. That's top heavy. That's not depth. He said there was no doubt the Hurricanes were a top 12 team in the nation, that it was essentially implying that it was crazy they did not make the college football playoff last year. He also came at the committee. I actually loved this from Rhett Lashley. He said, it is a situation set up for failure because there's human bias, and there always will be. I think if we could remove the committee from the situation, it would help, because no other professional or major sport in America or the world uses a committee to select its tournament participants. He was really cooking at this point. I mean, he was referencing FIFA. He was referencing, all of these different leagues. He was referencing rec league, soccer. It was very, very funny. highly recommend checking out everything that he had to say. But he had smoke for absolutely everybody. One more observation, quarterback Kevin Jennings was there, and somebody asked him, man, the media asked some funny questions. Basically was asking him about the rivalry between SMU and Boston College, and Kevin Jennings said it was one of the better rivalries in the ACC, which was funny. But he also said that his observation from playing in Boston is that the weather in Boston sucks. He said it's cold and wet. As a Boston lover, I can't really disagree. Boston does suck in November, December, January, and February, and sometimes March. So those were my observations from SMU. Let's move on to Stanford. Stanford wins the Frank Reich This Guy Loves Ball Award. Started off a little rocky. We had a 2-minute open from Frank Reich. His phone went off, said it was embarrassing, but everything after that was great. You could tell he has a plan of exactly what he wants to do, how he wants to do it. Was asked a couple questions about how are you handling being an interim coach. A little bit of a weird situation. He's an interim coach. He's not going to be there past a year, but he talked about how important laying the foundation is, making sure that you have the right people in the right place and the right process moving forward, so whoever picks up this program is able to take it in the right direction. Spoke on his interest and why he took the job at Stanford. It's a great challenge for him. He believes that he could bring a lot to the table for Andrew Luck, who he has a great relationship with. And again, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be the head football coach at Stanford. Pretty cool opportunity when you've made a lot of money and you're in this position. You get to do some pretty cool stuff. Being the head coach at Stanford is pretty cool. The best line that he had was he was talking about, he was asked, what is your offense going to look like? What is your team going to look like? And bunch of word salad, basically saying, I don't want to tip what we're going to look like. I like that people kind of don't know what we look like. But the best line, he said, if it's not physical, we failed. You cannot win football games without being physical, which is 100% true. And I got to tell you, it got me pretty fired up. You could see a couple of people in the stands that either played football or coached football or and they were kind of nodding along with it. He got the boys fired up. Stanford was by far the best dressed team, hands down, not close, best dressed team. Andrew Luck was in the house too. He was chopping it up with Luke Kuechly. He was wearing his Harry Potter eyeglasses. Andrew Luck, very tall, very, very tall. So that was cool. I thought it was cool that he was there. So that is what we got out of Stanford. And then we moved on to Justin Wilcox and Cal. Again, it's no disrespect. This was just a bit of a snooze fest. Justin Wilcox went no open, just immediately questions. No open, no opening statement. I thought that was a little bit of a bold move by the boy. He said the changing landscape of college football. I enjoyed this. He said you don't have to do this. It might not be for you, which is true. I think a lot of coaches are kind of in an evaluation standpoint of, man, this kind of sucks. Like NIL, boosters, especially if you're not in like a top 15 school, you're not getting kids because you form relationships as often. I don't want to speak for everybody, but it's more about, do I have more money than the teams that I'm trying to compete with? And that isn't for everybody. So I like that he didn't make an excuse there, like a lot of coaches would in that situation. He touched on, he had a lot of GM related questions, obviously having Ron Rivera serving in that position. And he made the point. It's pretty funny. One school in college hired a GM and now everybody is calling it a GM, but it's not really a GM. And Justin Wilcox spoke to that. He said, it's much more fluid in college football than it is in professional sports because a GM is essentially just a cap man and a roster man or woman. And in college football, it is recruiting versus drafting. You're dealing with the fluid nature of college football where you have essentially year-to-year agreements or semester-to-semester agreements versus longer-term contract lengths in the NFL. And lastly, and probably most importantly, you have to form relationships across campus, across your alumni, across your boards. You have to essentially be the handshaker person for the football program. In a lot of ways, the hot topic button for college football was you're hiring a CEO, which in a lot of cases is still true. But a lot of those responsibilities are, for better or for worse, being able to be pushed onto the GM role, especially when you have somebody with a little bit of gravitas, which is what you're getting from a Ron Rivera, which is what you're getting from an Andrew Luck. So when you bring somebody into that role who carries a significant amount of gravitas, you are making your job easier and not having to spend as much time shaking hands, getting money into the kitty, doing all of that. And then coaches probably in that situation can focus a little more on ball, which is probably what they want to do anyway. Observations. He was asked about his 2-5 record in one-score games. Tough. Us Virginia Tech fans, we know a little bit about one-score games and struggling in one-score games. Funny immediate remark, like you didn't have to point it out, but they did. We got a ton of coach speak there. Maybe the coach speak moment of the day. He said, it's not about one thing or one drill or one issue that we can fix that changes it. It's about everything. And he listed reasons for the 2-5. Not reasons. I'm not trying to be a jerk here, but it was very coach speak. He said we got to be better in the classroom. We got to have better class schedules. We got to have better food. We got to have better cardio. He said I could list 50 things that are the reason why we're 2-5 in one-score games. Again, it's what every coach would probably say to the media, and it's probably not the correct answer. On the flip side, it is never just one thing that is a reason that you lose that many games. But it was the coach speak moment of the day. Last observation from Cal. Devin Brown was in the building. He's going to be the quarterback for Cal this year. He was the former class of 2022 4-star quarterback and the 5th overall quarterback recruit in that class from Ohio State, transferred to Cal. One of the funnier moments, they asked him, how are you getting to know your teammates? He said, I have been playing pickleball with my teammates. Probably one of the most Cal things I have ever heard. That's coming from a guy who plays pickleball. But that is how he said is one of the ways that they are hitting it off. So shout out to pickleball in Berkeley. Lastly, UVA, Tony Elliott. Disclaimer. I really like Tony Elliott. In the brief passings that I've had with him, I enjoy him. I think two things. I'm not sure if he is a Power 5 head coach. I'm not going to say he's not. I'm not sure if he is. And the second thing is I think he was put in a really difficult situation. I don't know of a coach who was put in a more difficult situation in the Power 4. I really can't think of one. Really, really difficult situation to walk into with the tragedy number one at the top of the list, and a lot of movement in the athletic department, not as much buy-in in football as you would like to see. Obviously not the most important sport on campus. So he dealing with COVID, dealing with a coach who just out of nowhere left. So a lot of challenges. But I did want to say that I do really enjoy and think Tony Elliott's a good dude. He brought the energy, probably the most energy behind Rhett Lashley. It was kind of hard to beat Rhett today. He hit the crowd with a nice double good afternoon. So he asked it once. Nobody said anything. Asked it again. You got like the good morning. It's kind of like when the pastor gets up top and does that in the morning. Anyway, he did say that this is the most complete and deepest roster at UVA that they have had in the last 4 years. I agree with him. He also mentioned that, and he didn't say this in like a backhanded way at all, but he said, look, like when I took over from Bronco, again, I'm paraphrasing, that he honored the scholarships and the offers that were extended from the previous staff, which he didn't say this, but he was inferring it, was a barrier to him getting his own guys into the building and kind of slowed down the overall process. You can say that that's on him. You can say that there was the wrong way to go about it. That is what he did, and he is pointing out that they are now in a much better situation. Two quick observations. Number one, UVA has 54 newcomers that are on the team this year from last year. 32 of them are coming from the transfer portal. That is a large number to have of new players that are on the team this year. So very interested to see how that pans out. And then, my other observation basically was that Chandler Morris looked straight out of Pike. Like I was waiting for him to ask David Teal to name 5 brothers to get into the room. Straight frat looking dude. Guy can play though. I will give him that. Guy can play and he's got a lot of confidence. So interested to see how that works out. So those were my observations from ACC Media Day 1. And now I'm just going to talk about some points across the board, related, unrelated, that I just wanted to get in here. My first one is I am just posing the question, why shouldn't the ACC add Memphis? Why? The ACC is an odd number of teams. They offered the Big 12 $250 million to join and were rejected. I'm struggling to know a reason why we would hesitate to add Memphis. Jim Phillips mentioned today that one of the barriers to adding a conference game to our schedule was the fact that we had an odd number of teams. I would be curious, and put this in the comments, who is a team that you would be more interested in adding that is realistic outside of Memphis? Of course, people will say, we should add West Virginia. We should add Utah. We should add insert team here that is not joining the ACC. Of teams that would realistically join the ACC, and if you wanted to get that number to an even number, why would it not be Memphis? Memphis seems to make a ton of sense to me. Memphis has been a program that has won at a high enough level in football to where it seems to be a pipeline for coaches to then join either the ACC or other programs. So that's been interesting. They also are I'm not going to call them a blue blood, but they're maybe a magenta blood in basketball. Good enough program there. And then you also add a market of a major city. So one of the slides today was that the ACC has presence in a certain amount of the biggest cities in America. They don't have it on their brag rag, but they had it on the slideshow that they were playing when Jim was talking. So I don't see any reason why we shouldn't add Memphis, or at least consider it. Moving on. Man, Curt Signetti. I don't know. It seemed like Curt Signetti and Rhett Lashley called each other and said, "Hey, let's get a little crazy today. Let's get under some people's skin." So, Curt Signetti, here's one of his comments regarding the claims from SEC circles that Indiana didn't belong. Signetti said, "Nobody deserves to be in the playoffs because they've been in the playoffs 4 of the last 5 years. Do it on the field. If you get upset by a couple of teams, you shouldn't get upset by it." Curt, I'm so glad you said that. I'm so glad that you said that. Regardless of how you feel about Curt Signetti, this should not be a difficult concept for you to understand. Being good in the past, or wearing a patch of a conference who has other good teams in it, does not grant you the right to not deal with consequences or failures in the present day. That's pretty straightforward. Ole Miss can, and I like Ole Miss, Ole Miss can complain and whine and pontificate about how they should have made the playoffs last year. You shouldn't have lost to Kentucky. You straight should not have lost to Kentucky. South Carolina was one of the hottest teams in the country last year. Should not have lost all those games early on in the year. And I actually think they have a better case than Ole Miss, and they also have a better case than Miami. Shouldn't have lost to Syracuse. Don't lose to Syracuse the second to last week of the year. So, or I believe it was rivalry week. So thank you, Curt Signetti, for saying that. Curt also mentioned we need to standardize the schedules across the board. We need to take the decision-making off of the committee to some degree. Thank you. I completely agree. Now, I don't have the full context of this point. So I don't know if he was speaking specifically about the SEC adding another conference game or what they need to do. But I will take this quote to back up my point. I tweeted about this about the ACC, I believe, a week ago. Georgia Tech and Carolina, if you combine their schedules, are playing a grand total of 2 top 4 ACC title odds teams. They're both playing Clemson. Stanford alone plays 4 of the top 5 ACC title odds teams. Clemson, SMU, and Louisville play 3 of the top 5. Our conferences have gotten so large that it is almost a roll of the dice between if you get lucky enough to put yourself in a position to win 9, 10, 11, 12 games, or if you're in a position where you're saying, you know what, the year hasn't even started yet. I feel really good about our team. We're probably going to win 7 or 8 games. And if you look at a team like Arkansas, a team like Florida, a team like, oh man, who's another one? Arkansas, Florida, hell, Stanford, right? They're not really in a position to see the same success that some other teams may be set up for. Carolina, I have no idea if they're good or bad or if Bill's going to work or not work. I do know that they benefit from an easy schedule. I know that they have a chance that if they're somewhat competent, they can come out and they can beat everybody because they're not playing anybody all year. So I completely agree with Kurt there on both points. Let's see. What else do we have? Rhett Lashley. I should have had this with SMU, but I saved it for the bottom because I think it's important. He was asked why the ACC is a perennial too big league. So he was tossed a softball with an opportunity to, just absolutely pimp shot it out of the stadium. I don't know what other states in this great United States have PBA cards. I don't know if you've ever heard of PBA cards. PBA card basically says it's a New Jersey thing, or at least it is in New Jersey, maybe in other states. PBA cards basically say, yo, I'm homies with a cop. Some cop knows somebody in my family or someone in my family is a cop. So when you pull me over, I'm going to hand you my license. And I know it's going 15 over, but you should consider not giving me a ticket because I'm boys with a cop. Auto bids are the PBA cards of college football. Please explain to me why we need to make a decision before year starts how many teams other than 1 or maybe 2 should make the college football playoff based upon you just being in a conference. And I mean that especially for the Big 12 and for the ACC. I know these conferences are getting large. I know everybody wants to posture to get as many teams in as they can. I get it. Myself, as a viewer and a fan of college football, I think it is preposterous that we should be angling for a certain number of teams to get in, especially if they're not competing for that conference's title game. And I'm going to point out a year just to give an example. If the ACC is a perennial too big bid league, are you telling me that in 2019 we should have had 2 teams in the college football playoff if it existed at that time with that many teams? In 2019, Clemson went 14-1. The second best team in that conference was UVA, who went 9-5 and lost 62-17 in the ACC championship, and then got absolutely throttled by Florida in their bowl game. That same year, Oklahoma, while in the Big 12, won 12 games, and Baylor won 11. So I think it's being lost on so many, or maybe it's not being talked about enough, that conferences are not of equal value year in and year out. I understand that the SEC for the better part of the last decade and a half has been the best conference of college football. That gap either has significantly shrunk or does not exist anymore. The ACC was much more powerful in 2009 than it is today. So every year, these things change. And to lock in how many times or how many teams should be elevated into going to a playoff, to me, is preposterous. I think that needs to stop. Dumbest thing that I read today. From Matt Fortuna, apparently the Big Ten commissioner, Tony Petitti, said, quote, 8-4 is a winning percentage. If you project that winning percentage in every other sport, I'm pretty sure they make the postseason. Tony Petitti, this is the dumbest thing that I've heard all day, comparing professional sports, which have around 30 teams, to college sports, which have over 100. That is crazy. I don't know why you're doing that. And it's actually hilarious that you're doing that, given my next point, which was Brett McMurphy put out that 6 Big Ten teams do not play a non-conference power team this year. Indiana, Northwestern, Maryland, Penn State, Rutgers, and Washington. None of those teams play a non-conference power team this season. So, first of all, Tony Petitti, crazy statement. Number 2, given those 6 Big Ten teams that are not playing any conference power teams this year, if I'm Ohio State, who hosts Texas, UCLA, who hosts Utah, Illinois, who goes to Duke, Oregon, who hosts Oklahoma City, or Michigan going to Oklahoma, or Michigan State hosting Boston College, all in the first 2 weeks of the season, how are you not pissed at those other schools that are not playing a single conference power team this year? Why is that allowed? It's just kind of crazy. Doesn't make any sense to me. Tony Petitti, be better. We can't be making dumb statements like that. Last 2 things, and then I'll let you guys go. Or gals. Jimbo Fisher is now on ACC Network. Pretty hilarious. Jimbo Fisher carried a ton of water for the SEC. Understandably so, because that's where he worked when he was at Texas A&M. We've all kind of been wondering what Jimbo's doing. Well, what he's going to be doing is ACC PM on the ACC Network. So buckle your damn bootstraps. It's gonna be. I'm excited he's here. It's also funny that the last time we saw Jimbo Fisher related to the ACC was when he threw his Christmas tree away when he left Florida State in 2017. Thought that was pretty funny. Last thing, The Athletic put out their college football program valuation rankings. Giving you a chance to guess where Tech came in. Okay. Virginia Tech came in 5th on this list in the conference and 31st overall. They are valued at $455 million, and they annually bring in $65 million of football revenue. Again, you can check it out. There are a bunch of disclaimers on this list. It's a pretty popular article that comes out every year. Now, the teams ranked ahead of Virginia Tech: UNC at $572 million, Miami at $604 million, Clemson at $665 million, and Florida State at $867 million. Fun fact, Virginia Tech's valuation at $455 million was slightly higher than the $450 million valuation of the WNBA's New York Liberty. The more that you know. That is interesting. Let me see. I just got my schedule for tomorrow. What do we got? Taking a look at the schedule for tomorrow, we have Florida State, Georgia Tech, Louisville, Pittsburgh, Syracuse, and Wake. What am I most excited about? You know I'm excited to hear from Brent Key. You know that I'm excited. I think we're going to a little hot seat action for Florida State and Coach Norvell. Wouldn't want to be him tomorrow. Probably going to get some difficult questions. How pissed does Pat Narduzzi look tomorrow? Does he have on some major stank face? Got to find out. What else? Syracuse? I mean, find me a more entertaining coach than Fran Brown. Find me one. I don't know if you listened to the Adam Brenneman interview. It was great. Jeff Brom from Louisville. That'd be fun. Wake Forest. Wake Forest. We'll be pleasantly surprised with anything that you bring to the table. No disrespect. Snack break sponsored by the Pop-Tarts Bowl on the 3rd floor. That's going to be exciting tomorrow. But anyway, that'll do it. I said it was going to be a quick pod. Here we are, 50 some odd minutes into it. I will be doing a recap of each one of the days of ACC Media Day this week. If you have any questions, do let me know in the comments. Thank you all for joining. Football's here, guys. I mean, July 22nd, it's right around the corner. and I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Peace out.